Chuck awoke to the early morning sun beaming through the window and warming his face. For a moment he didn't move. He listened. Every creak of the lodge, every distant sound outside. His eyes scanned the wall, watching for shadows that might pass across it. Nothing. Chuck rolled onto his knees and rubbed his eyes. Cars and power at the same time, he muttered quietly. That should be one or the other, not both. The questions had followed him into sleep and were waiting for him when he woke. The gas pumps died, and every car coasted to a stop. He shook his head slowly. Within seconds. Still thinking, Chuck rolled up his Woobie and stuffed it into a compression bag. I can't figure it out. His thoughts drifted back to the BMW. The radio died first, or maybe it just lost reception. He paused. I don't even remember now. Chuck sat still for a moment. For years, the Army had trained him to analyze problems, cause and effect, action and reaction. But this didn't follow any pattern he understood. He exhaled quietly and whispered, Lord, you see the whole board. I only see one square at a time. Across the room, Tove sat watching him, waiting. Chuck reached into his Kelty pack and pulled out the collapsible silicone bowl. He filled it from his water bottle. I wonder if the old cars are still running, he murmured. Water poured into the bowl. That could explain one thing. He stared down at it. But electronics and vehicles both dying? He shook his head again. That makes no sense. He slid the bowl toward her. Tove continued staring at him, waiting. Chuck blinked. Oh, girl, I'm sorry. He pointed toward the bowl. Go ahead. Tove stepped forward and lapped the water quickly. When she finished, she sat beside him again. Chuck watched her for a moment. Even in chaos, the simple things still mattered. Water, food, shelter. He remembered something Yeshua had once said. Look at the birds of the air. Your Father feeds them. If God remembered the birds, maybe he hadn't forgotten them either. Chuck reached into his pack and pulled out an emergency ration bar. He broke it into 4 pieces, one for Tove, one for himself. The others went back into the wrapper. He chewed slowly and washed it down with a few swallows of water. Then he poured another small amount into Tove's bowl. She waited again. Chuck chuckled softly. It's okay, girl. Go ahead. Once everything was packed, Chuck lifted the Kelty onto his shoulders and cinched the straps tight. He scanned the room. Corners, floor, window ledges, nothing left behind. He walked to the window one more time and looked out across the parking lot. Still quiet. When he was satisfied, he opened the door slowly and stepped onto the covered porch. The parking lot was empty. The bonfire from the night before had collapsed into a pile of smoking coals. The boys that tossed the Nerf football around were gone. No voices, no movement, just the quiet of the mountain morning. Chuck adjusted his pack and walked toward the Chevron station. If people had panicked during the night, there might still be something useful left behind. When he reached the building, he slowed. The door wasn't kicked in. No broken windows. The shades were still down. He checked the door. Locked. Chuck walked around the back and reached into a small pouch on his belt. His lockpick set slid easily into his hand. A tension bar, a rake pick. Within seconds, the pins fell into place. He cracked the door slightly. In. Tove slipped inside and disappeared into the dark. Chuck waited. Seconds later, she returned and sat beside him. All clear. Chuck stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. He paused in surprise. Everything was still there.
No looting, no panic. Just a quiet gas station frozen in time.
Chuck walked the aisles slowly, calculating how long the trip home might take. 3, maybe 4 days. He gathered what he needed: 3 one-quart bottles of water, a couple packs of ramen, some salted nut rolls, a bottle of ibuprofen, a pack of bandages, a carton of cigarettes. Then something for Tove. 2 cans of dog food, a bag of milk bones. Chuck placed everything carefully into his pack. He looked at the shelves again before leaving. He had taken what he needed, not what he wanted. Survival didn't mean becoming a thief. His father had taught him that long ago. And the Torah said the same thing. Chuck tightened the straps on his pack and gave the store one last look. If the Lord was willing, this would carry him home to Prineville. He patted down his belt. Knife, flashlight, holster. Everything secure. Chuck opened the door slowly, scanned the area again, and called softly. Tove. She stepped outside beside him. Chuck locked the door and slipped the picks back into his pouch. As Chuck crossed the empty parking lot, he wondered where everyone had gone. Hopefully west, toward Rhododendron. That meant fewer people in the direction he was heading. When he reached Highway 26, he turned east, toward Madras, toward home. The road stretched empty toward the horizon. Chuck bowed his head slightly as he walked. Guide my steps, Adonai. It was a simple prayer, but sometimes the simplest prayers were the strongest. He prayed for Sarah, for the kids, especially Samuel. For now, the boy was the protector of the family. Chuck remembered another Chevron station about 7.5 miles down the highway. He had always thought it was ridiculous. 2 Chevron stations on Mount Hood that close together. Today he was grateful for it. His thoughts circled again to the same questions. Were they attacked? Was it something from the sun? Nothing made sense. Everything had stopped almost instantly. Cars, power, radios. Step after step, he worked his way down the highway. Eventually, the second Chevron came into view, but this one wasn't empty. A brand new Winnebago sat in the parking lot with its doors open. 2 older couples sat nearby in lawn chairs facing the sun. As Chuck approached, both older men stood up. One wore a U.S. Navy veteran hat. Chuck noticed his hand slide casually into his pocket. The outline of a handgun was obvious. Chuck slowed, then gave 2 sharp clicks with his tongue. Tove. Moments later, the shepherd came bounding out of the woods with her tail wagging. The older women laughed. Oh my goodness, look at that dog! What a beautiful shepherd! Chuck raised his hands slightly as he approached the men. You folks in trouble? The men looked at each other. We're not sure. The story sounded familiar. Everything shut down. The RV coasted to a stop. The gas station attendant left on a mountain bike and never returned. No traffic, no power. Chuck shared what little he knew, which wasn't much, mostly guesses. The man in the Navy hat studied him. You a veteran? Chuck nodded. Yes, sir. Army. 7th Infantry, 4th Infantry, and a few other places in between. The old sailor smiled. I was Navy. Chuck grinned. Is that really the military? All 3 men burst out laughing. Chuck eventually grew serious again. You folks need supplies. He nodded toward the Winnebago. That vehicle isn't going anywhere. You'll want to head west on 26, then north on Highway 35. He pointed down the road. There were farms that direction. Good people. He explained about the nearby river where they could get fresh water. Boil it if you can. Chuck opened the Chevron station for them and helped gather a few supplies. Food, water, basic medicine. Chuck had planned on walking straight through, But leaving people without help wasn't in him. A man didn't survive alone, and Scripture never taught men to look only after themselves. Eventually, Chuck checked the sun. He'd already lost several hours. He tightened his pack. "I've got a long road ahead." They shook hands. The old sailor nodded respectfully. "Stay safe, soldier." "You too."
A few miles later, Chuck realized how little ground he had covered. 7 miles. He exhaled slowly. 30 miles a day. If he couldn't average that, he'd never make it home. But the pack was heavy, and he could feel his heart working harder than he liked. He remembered something an army chaplain once told him during a long field exercise. God rarely shows you the whole road. Only the next step. Chuck looked down the highway. One step would be enough for now. A couple miles farther, he saw a sign. Buck Peak Trailhead. He still had an hour or two of daylight left, but he didn't know what waited farther down the road. Sometimes the wise decision was the early one. Chuck stepped off the highway and walked into the trees. The trailhead had a few old fire pits scattered around. Someone had tied garbage bags to a tree to keep animals out. Chuck dropped his pack beside a pine and leaned against the trunk. "Tove." She came over and curled beside him. Chuck pulled out the last pieces of the ration bar. One for him, one for her. They ate quietly as the forest slowly darkened. Chuck leaned back and watched the wind move through the tall trees. The world might be broken, but the mountains still stood. The wind still moved through the forest. And for tonight, at least, he and Tove were safe. Chuck whispered softly, "Thank you, Lord." Chuck rested for about 30 minutes, leaning back against the tree and slowly petting Tove's head. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. His thoughts drifted home. He wondered what his family was doing. He wondered what they were eating. He wondered if they were worried about him. Chuck looked down at the dirt for a moment. "Watch over them, Adonai," he whispered quietly. After a while, he rolled onto his knees and opened his pack. Dinner time. He pulled out one of the cans of dog food and opened it. The lid peeled back with a soft metallic snap. Chuck poured the food into the silicone bowl, crushed several milk bones in his hand, and sprinkled them over the top. Tove watched every movement. Chuck set the bowl down. She stepped forward and began eating. Chuck reached into his pack and pulled out an emergency ration bar for himself. He tore the wrapper open and chewed slowly, washing it down with small sips of water. The sun was sinking behind the trees now. The light was fading fast. Chuck wiped his hands on his pants and pulled out his headlamp. He slipped the strap over his head but didn't turn it on right away. First, he looked. A slow sweep of the trees. Nothing. Then he listened. The wind moved gently through the branches. Still nothing. He clicked the lamp on to the low setting. Just enough light. Chuck reached into his pack again and pulled out his sleeping pad. He unrolled it and blew it up slowly. Then came the Woobie. He spread it out beside the pad and placed a small roll of plastic nearby, in case the mountain weather decided to turn during the night. Tove finished eating and trotted back over. She sat down in front of him, watching, waiting. Chuck smiled faintly and reached down, picking up a small stick from the ground. Tove's ears popped up. Her body went alert. The tail started moving. Chuck turned slowly and tossed the stick toward the tree line. It disappeared into the brush. Chuck turned back toward his pack. Then, something flickered in the corner of his eye. He froze. Red. Just for a split second. Chuck's brain tried to catch up with what he'd seen. Reflection? Glass? Optics? His heart slammed hard in his chest. Tove, down! The command came out low and sharp. Tove collapsed instantly to the ground without hesitation. Chuck slapped his hand over the headlamp. Darkness. His thumb found the switch and killed the light. The woods swallowed the clearing. Chuck slid silently behind the nearest tree and crouched low. Slow breath. In. Out. His heart was hammering now, but years of training pushed through the adrenaline. Stay calm. Observe. Chuck stared into the darkness. Somewhere out there, something had reflected that red light.
As Chuck prepares for the journey, he pours water into Tove's bowl and breaks open a ration bar for himself. It is a simple moment: food, water, and rest. These are the most basic needs of life, yet in normal times, people rarely think about them. Grocery stores are always open, refrigerators are full, and clean water flows easily from a faucet. But when those systems disappear, the simplicity of provision becomes clear. This moment echoes the words of Yeshua in Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your Father in heaven feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? The birds live without storage or long-term plans. Each day they search for food and water, and somehow the earth provides what they need. They live within the care of the Creator, who sustains all life. Chuck begins to recognize the same truth on the mountain. The electrical grid may have failed, but the earth itself has not. The forests still stand, streams still flow, the mountains remain. The same God who feeds the birds has not abandoned his creation. Chuck still prepares wisely for the road ahead. He gathers supplies and takes only what he needs. Faith does not remove responsibility. Birds still search for their food each day. In the same way, Chuck walks forward using the strength and wisdom God has given him. Matthew 6:26 reminds us that provision does not ultimately come from human systems. It comes from the Creator who sustains life itself. Even on a long and uncertain road, the same God who feeds the birds of the air is still watching over his people. And if he faithfully cares for them, we can trust that he has not forgotten us either. As Chuck begins the long walk east, one thing becomes clear: preparation matters. The world may have changed suddenly, but the small choices made beforehand are now making the difference between panic and progress. Chuck's pack isn't filled with flashy gear. Instead, it holds simple, practical items: water, ration bars, basic medical supplies, and food for Tove. Each item serves a purpose. When every mile must be walked, weight and usefulness matter. Preparation doesn't mean buying everything at once or trying to predict every possible emergency. It means thinking ahead and building readiness over time. A dependable backpack, a few days of food, good footwear, and basic skills can make a huge difference when normal systems fail. Mobility is another key part of preparation. Chuck can keep moving because his supplies are organized and ready to go. He isn't dependent on a vehicle or electricity. When circumstances change quickly, the ability to move safely becomes a major advantage. Preparation also requires discipline. Chuck takes only what he needs, knowing that too much weight slows him down. The goal is balance. Enough supplies to continue forward, but not so much that it becomes a burden. In uncertain times, preparation helps turn chaos into manageable steps forward.